Today I'm going to be bringing a message that Jesus shares in the temple when he reads the scroll of Isaiah. And often I think in scripture there's this idea that, if a story's worth telling, it's worth telling more than once. And you'll see this very often throughout scripture. It repeats right the way through, really all the way back to the law. And it's very interesting. And so I'm going to read this passage that is in Luke 4, and it's also in Matthew 11 and in Luke, and it's from Isaiah. And it says this: "The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is upon me, for the Lord has anointed me to preach the good news, the gospel, to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty for the captives and release for the prisoners, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour." So Jesus ends it there. It actually goes, "and the day of vengeance of our God," in Isaiah. But I think that's because Jesus is focusing on a specific point. And there's a really interesting word there that it goes on about, which is liberty. Liberty is a word called, in the Hebrew, diror. Diror is got this idea really, really deep into the scriptures. So obviously you see Isaiah has brought this word, but he's actually quoting Leviticus 25, verse 10, where it says, "Proclaim liberty throughout the land to all of its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you and each of you to return to your family's prosperity and your own clan." And this is all this idea of jubilee and debt forgiveness, which is really interesting because when this word liberty is used by Jesus, it's got a financial connotation to it. The word diror means to set those under the financial burdens free. And it's a very interesting word. And I just thought, when I saw that, it's used right the way through scripture to mean the same thing, which is to set those who are poor and who are struggling free from debt. And that's because when we're speaking about this, we're speaking to an agricultural society, and most people lived in absolute abject poverty, and when their crops failed, you were pushed further and further into debt. And so it was commonplace to try and have debt annulments when new kings came in. And this is where Jesus is saying, as he comes in as king, that he wants us as believers to set those in financial bondage free. That I think is really interesting when we look at what we do as a church and what we do as individually. That Jesus wants us to help those who are struggling with poor. And you see, this phrase, as well as the good news to the poor, is used nowhere else in the Synoptic Gospels, which is Mark, Matthew, Luke. It's only used here. It's a real pinpoint that God is saying, let us help those who are poor and help alleviate that. And actually, as a church, we're doing that through CAP. We are seeing those who are struggling being blessed through being set free. But maybe the challenge, I would say, is how can we do that in our daily life? How can we look to proclaim liberty, to proclaim diror to those who need to hear the freedom today? And I do believe this also has a spiritual element too, that we need to be proclaiming Jesus, the liberty that brings. Really interestingly, this is a passage ascribed onto the Liberty Bell in America. And I love that idea that when it rings out, it's proclaiming freedom across the land. I think it was originally from independence from us, but I like the idea that can we be a bell sounding out freedom for those who are in debt, who need to know Jesus, and who need to hear the good news to free them from brokenheartedness.